I cannot believe that it took me this long to figure it out. But up until the 1800s, mid-1800s, the area that had deeded what eventually became Jeffrey Epstein and Howard Lutnick's house had been a farm. It had been basically the Lennox farm, but I don't think that was the real name. I'm going to get the real name. But it's during the Civil War in which the Lamans and the Walkers had created a fake kind of cotton, sugar, and tobacco exchange out of New York City. And they had taken over plantations in the South as early as 1832 in conjunction with the founding of Skull and Crossbones. But by the way, they are who signed the slave treaty with Great Britain. It is actually one of the Walker Bush ancestors who brought more slaves to this country as far as the voyages than anyone else. His name was Thomas Walker. Look it up. But anyways, St. James, we all forget that Joe Kennedy lived in the UK and he was an ambassador to the court of St. James from 1938 to 1940. But it was ahead of the 1920s that he was aligned with the Churchill's plot to siphon 100% of U.S. mineral rights by assuming the identity of the Kennedys of Ohio. That's right. That's right. The founder of the Farm Bureau married a woman named Sarah Jane Kennedy. Their firstborn son was Robert Kennedy Dunlap. Secondborn son was Joseph Kennedy. As part of World War I and World War II, they were going to be killing them off and assuming the identity of the ancestors. As crazy of a plot as it seems, they almost pulled it off. They almost did. But so they were doing it under Spencer. And that's why in the 1920s, Edward married Wallace Simpson, who was a Spencer. And they, guess where? They say he deflected to the United States. Nope. He was actually in the islands, Bahamas, as the governor, running a network of shell entities that were set up by Joe Kennedy as aliases to kind of mirror. And Joe was working out of the merchandise mart, which is why it was granted a separate zip code. But all of a sudden it hit me. It's St. James. And if you look at the map at where Howard Lutnick and Jeffrey Epstein were deeded their townhomes originally as 7 and 9, and then it changes to 9-11. But these little check marks over here, that means that someone actually had to amend these files. But they call it the St. James Condo Association. See the condo board? They say condo board. Condo board. Well, as it turns out, I find out that where they live used to be called the Willard School or the Willard Building, and that's the Steiner Trust, very much affiliated. And the Steiner Trust held title to the George Washington Land Patent. A lot of people don't know that. Yep, George Washington Land Patent, Mason-Dixon Line Survey, and quite a few others relating to Pennsylvania were titled to the Steiner, Willard, Goodman Trusts. And it ends up being left to Zimmerman, which is very much affiliated with the World Zion Association. So what they did is they just annexed that property for Jeffrey Epstein, and then they granted him an island, also named St. James. And then Epstein is Little St. James, and then Big St. James. Guess what's Big St. James? The King of England. This was a plot that goes all the way back, and that's why he married a Spencer. And this is why insurance had to be amended as far as laws and global banking regulations ahead of the Glass-Steagall Act. See, Israel was very much involved in the hunting of Diana Spencer, and they took out bounties, aka life insurance policies, on her head. Wouldn't you believe it's Aetna Life, the same Aetna Life that they used for the heads of slaves? I mean, they actually insured slaves so that if they killed them off themselves, they could pay themselves out. Everything rolls up under Baker Hughes, which at one time adds Patterson. And they add the Patterson because the founder of the Farm Bureau was Hugh Patterson Dunlap, as in Wright Patterson. This is how the CIA has hijacked numerous Air Force bases, including Rickenbacker. And Rickenbacker 1 as well as Nationwide 1, as well as Northwood Ventures 1 and Northwood Ventures 2.0 were all recorded out of Columbus, Ohio by a network of attorneys working for the industrial complex. So Cigna, when it comes back to life after having been shut down in 1999 with a slew of international-based shell entities, it does so as a holding company. That's what it says. And it's signing into an acquisition agreement with Ace Insurance. Ace Insurance, but it's just acting as a holding company. Well, Ace Insurance is one of the many insurance entities that are affiliated with the World Trade Center. And they actually pay out double. And that's not really an insurance payment as much as it is liquidating the U.S. Farmers Trust. You know all that gold that was just found associated with some CIA agent? That's what I was wondering. I was like, where did all the gold go? Yeah. In 2019, Jeffery Epstein is killing himself. The Day Ketterer Law Office in Canton, Ohio, it used to be William McKinley, and then they changed it to McKinley Day when the plot was in motion, and then they changed it to Day Ketterer, just as it announces it's shutting its doors. But one of the most profitable entities of the Rockefeller family in the 1800s was this Aetna Insurance Company, which sold insurance to slave owners, in addition to all of the human cargo that they trafficked. So today is really no different than the 1800s. It's just now children. Children. So Cigna comes back to life, wouldn't you believe it, in 2001. And speaking of payments, anybody who's involved, they typically get these certificates issued. And sometimes they're from the Rockefeller University, other times they're from one of these shell entities or a railroad or blah, blah, blah. But they're paying people out. And this is what Jeffery Epstein set up ahead of 9/11. And they do it a lot of times through foundations. And I just recently saw that the Clintons accepted $140 million associated with the transport of uranium out of this country to Russia. That we let someone that was a CIA director affiliated with the murder and assassination of John F. Kennedy become president. And he signed in 1976, George H.W. Bush claimed he would never ever run for the White House, but he did. And so Voice, Sater, Seymour, and Peace, this is backdated because Big Papi had to shut down the plot in 1984. This is the Iran-Contra affair, but by the way, it's also cocaine and opium trade. Big time. Big time. Clinton's brother was involved in it. The cocaine side of it. But the Bushes and the Tafts and the Russell Trust, all about the opium trade. So anytime that the plot is in motion and they're liquidating the Farmers Trust, you can expect opium and fentanyl and, Oxycontin to go through the roof. But this is Cigna Real Estate Funds Limited Partnership. It's paying people out. It is a holding company. It's not insurance. So by letting these come back to life from the historical eras that were the worst times in American history, INA Corporation is Insurance of North America. Yeah. And then Allied Insurance of America is not even incorporated. It's just a billion shells. No different than how the Rockefellers set up their oil and gas. But they're also unlicensed. Unlicensed to operate as insurance. But yet they got to incorporate in 2001 ahead of 9/11, and no one has ever investigated it. Well, 322, March 22nd, used to be like tax day over in England. And on their flag is St. George. Butnick and how he obtains the townhome is the most important part here. It's the New York City Department of Transportation Division of Franchises right here that shows as the current owner. And that might be because they seized the property the minute Jeffrey Epstein is arrested. And you can see it's the Comet Trust, and it's Jeffrey Epstein care of Guido Goldman and the Comet Trust. And it's shown here as an apartment. That's the most important thing here. It goes from a single family residence as 11 East. And then it's the Howard Lutnick Personal Asset Management Trust. It shows the previous owner is the New York Division of Franchises. They issue him alone paying him out $20 million for his, his work on 9/11. Here's where Jeffrey Epstein receives a small payment. And the payments are all out of Texas, not the JPMorgan Chase in New York. It goes on to now be apartments, back to apartments, as of backdated to the Trump Palace condo. 215 apartments and 8 penthouses.